Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to Peace Fund Radio with Ethan Dettenmaier and Adrian Paul, right here on LA Talk Radio.
Good morning. Welcome to Peace Fund Radio.
Hello.
Oh,
How are we all?
We're fantastic. How are you?
Oh, we're a little cold here, but not too bad. We're not in sunny California at the moment, but that's okay.
It's hard to be you. Where are you?
No, it's hard to be you because you're in the sun and we're in the rain.
I don't know how, the sun is out, yeah, but it's not exactly like I'm in the tropics.
Well, I see that you've been busy all week, following a couple of your tweets here and there. But I've not really been online too much just because, it's the beauty of living in somebody else's place, and in another country where people speak an entirely different language, which is actually what our show is going to be about today, about giving kids the gift of language. And I think it's important. I've seen it firsthand with my daughter. It's frustrating. Do your kids speak another language, Ethan?
She doesn't. She speaks a little bit. We're slowly picking it up, but no.
Right. Is John Bailey there?
He's here.
Yes, I'm here, guys. How are you this morning?
Hey, John. Anybody in
Hey.
your family like kids speak another language?
No, not really. Not really. I used to speak Spanish very well in high school and college, but I didn't stay on top of it as well as I should have. I'd like to think I could maybe pick it up again if I sat down and tried, but shamefully, I let it lapse.
Well, the funny thing is like, being in Italy, I speak to my kids in Italian all the time because I want them to pick up another language. I want them to pick up 2 languages, 3 languages if they can. But, studies basically show that fewer than 1 in 100 kids actually has learned to speak a foreign language from their experience in high school. And if that's the case, what's the point of spending hours learning vocabulary and studying word tenses? There's that question. Like you, John, you said you spent a lot of time doing it and then just lost it. Right.
Yeah, just from the sheer fact of not staying on top of it.
The funny thing is, I'm getting frustrated. My daughter, I speak to her in Italian, and she just doesn't want to speak to me in Italian. She understands, I would say, 85%, 90% of everything I tell her. And then there's the Italian that is here, because I speak a rudimentary Italian in a sense. When you're in the country, there's a lot of tenses and verbs, etc., that are used that you might not necessarily use in everyday Italian that you use anywhere else. So it's interesting to hear it here. But the great thing is watching her now have to try and speak, and now she's coming to me saying, how do you say this? And I put her with my cousins' kids and all that, and she has to communicate, and it's amazing what it does. Kids have a great tendency to not have to speak the same language to communicate. Yet having another language is earlier really actually sticks with them for a very long time. I heard somebody sigh there. That was Ethan thinking maybe I should say something. Or
No. It was me actually listening to what you were saying. I know, contrary to probably what you believe, I was actually paying attention, and I thought you were making some very good points.
Well, the interesting thing is, I know we've talked about this before on the show, and basically we talked about research shows that a child's brain is most primed to learn multiple languages from the time they're 9 months to 7 years old. So it's a really important time if you want to teach a child another language. But the other important thing about it is that it really actually connects the left and right cortex of the brain, which allows them not just to learn another language, but also to learn or have the ability to learn other things more easily because you are connecting the left and right side of the brain. And it basically says young kids are uniquely suited to learning a second language, and it's because it's hardwired to acquire it. And never again will it be as easy or as natural to do it as when they're that young. I don't know about you guys. Do you speak another language, Ethan?
Yeah, I used to speak a little Italian and I used to speak a little German, so that doesn't count as a yes, but I do have some experience with it. And Spanish.
No, but the reason I'm asking it, I mean, John, you said you spoke Spanish
Spanish,
earlier.
yes.
Right? If you hear Spanish now, do you think you'd be able to pick it up?
I think I would. One of the things that I enjoyed the most about Spanish, and it was interesting because, again, I was in high school when I started to learn it. And actually, our senior project, there were only two of us who took the senior Spanish class, myself and my friend Bob. And for our senior Spanish project, we made a movie that was all of the dialogue was in Spanish, and the star of the movie was our exchange student from Ecuador, Jose. The movie was called Super Captain Ecuador. I played the villain, and Bob was my henchman, and Jose was Super Captain Ecuador. It was a ton of fun, and the whole thing was in Spanish. And if I can find it, I'll try to get that. I'll try to get that online somehow or another.
I want to see that. I want to see you playing the villain, John.
It was great. It was a lot of fun, and I was always fascinated by. I have a lot of interest in literature and writing. So for me, I was always fascinated by the grammatical side of Spanish, and that was something that I really took to. I could read it really well. I could write it fluently, and I could speak it very well as well. The only problem I had was if I heard a native Spanish speaker speaking it, they would speak it so quickly that it was difficult for me to sometimes pick it up in conversation. Even though I could fluently read it and write it, it was sometimes hard for me to get it in conversation if I was speaking with someone who was very, very fluent in it. And I think that's where that hardwiring comes in that you were talking about, Adrian. It's much better if you can learn that at a younger age to where it comes more naturally.
I think, when you have a propensity to learn languages when you're younger. I mean, my parents made me speak Italian. My mother especially wanted me to speak Italian when I was a kid. Then I learned French in school. But, it's stayed with me ever since on all the journeys that I've done, trying to speak the language of the country that I was in. It made it easier somehow to actually be able to learn that, maybe because either the tenses were the same, and the communication really helps because then you can kind of fall into that society's type of rhythm, if you like.
Right.
And I think it's kind of, the interesting thing is the United States doesn't nationally mandate the study of a foreign language in public schools, although many schools around the world have incorporated requirements a long, long, long time ago. I've got statistics here, but it basically says that in 2001, the Center of Applied Linguistics discovered that most countries have mandatory foreign language requirements for children beginning at 8 years old. However, in the United States, most students do not begin to learn another language until 9th grade or the age 14. And at that point, it's a lot harder to learn. A lot harder because your propensities, as I said to you before, the left and right cortex of the brain isn't as easily connected when it's past the age of 10, 11 or 12 for children. So I think that's a shame that, we in the United States don't allow, our children to have the ability to speak another language. This world is getting smaller. We all know that by the internet and all the stuff that we hear about everywhere else. I mean, my Facebook page is people from all around the world speaking different languages, and it's great to actually be able to even type my rudimentary French or Spanish into something to sort of reply to them.
Mm-hmm. And I think all too often, too, I think a lot of people rely on some of those translating programs without having the more, the basic understanding of how that grammar really works. The grammar in one language may not be the same as the other. And without that core understanding, it is difficult to really even express, like you said, Adrian. It's difficult to express what you're even trying to say in the first place sometimes.
Well, there's so many exchange programs now, which I think are fantastic. When you have, and I know that kids in the United States do this because my brother actually has them in Thailand. They have students from one of the colleges, one of the universities in the United States goes over to him in Thailand each year, and I know there are exchange programs between Europe and the United States where kids go there for 2-3 weeks at a time. They're put up, and that's really when they should be encouraged to try and speak the language with the people that they're with, rather than try and speak in their own language, because that's the point when you really can pick it up, is when you're immersed into that culture. And I think if you've got a rudimentary knowledge of it prior, doing those things once a year or once every couple of years or something really allows you to keep it up. And who knows where it will take you? Because, as I said, the world's getting smaller, and I think, the requirement of actually being able to speak another language is going to be necessary.
And I think it's difficult here in the United States, too, because we take for granted that English is spoken practically everywhere in the world. So there's not so much of an incentive for us to sometimes learn other languages, and that's something else. I
don't think that's it, John. I think it's because the United States is so big that you don't really have to go much further. I mean, think about it. You fly 5 hours.
That's a very good point.
5 hours, and you're still in the same speaking country. Whereas in Europe, whatever, you fly 1 hour, you're an hour and a half, whatever. You can go over 2 or 3 different countries.
Right.
So you need to be able to learn those different languages, whereas the United States doesn't have it. England had the same issue. I remember when I was growing up, most English people, when they went abroad, they expected everybody to speak English, which I thought was rather pompous, to be totally honest, because why should Spanish people or Italian people speak the language because of a tourist has come to visit their country? It should be the other way around, really, shouldn't it?
Well, too, you have to think of it in terms of it's kind of overwhelming for someone, I think, in the United States sometime. Let's use your example. Someone in Spain, okay, they know Spanish, they know English, but so that's basically one other language to learn. If you're English speaking primarily, then you've got, do you learn Italian, do you learn French, do you learn Spanish, and all these other languages. I think that kind of plays into it too. I think sometimes people are so overwhelmed that there are so many other languages out there, you have to think, well, which one am I going to focus on and learn? And I wish there was a way to kind of get around the overwhelming part of it.
I think that's a great comment. However, I do also think that it's a barrier that we put on ourselves.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's like it's an easy way out of saying, well, I didn't really know which one to pick, so I didn't pick any.
Yes, it is.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, certainly not defending it. Just trying to make the point.
No, I mean, I agree with you, but I just think it's an easy way out to do. The other thing I decided to do on this trip was my kids. When I don't let them watch a huge amount of TV or iPad or all that type of stuff, but when they do, they like watching some of the cartoons that are pretty elementary, and some of them have some good messages attached to them, teaching them certain ways of being, etc. And I figured, well, let me do this, which they do in Italy, I know. In Italy and a lot of foreign countries, they will play foreign cartoons in the original language, and the kids learn it. They learn the language through the cartoons.
That's fantastic.
So, who was it who spoke to me? Somebody. Oh, yes, I was in Russia. And there was this young girl. She was a young actress who was actually on Alexander Nevsky's movie. She spoke very good English. And I said, where did you learn it? She said, cartoons. She said, at Nickelodeon. And I said, really? And so what I've done, I've bought at least 10 DVDs in Italian, which are some of the most famous cartoons that there are, or animated movies, if you want to call them that, in Italian, and I'm putting my kids in front of it. So if they're watching mindless TV at an hour a day or an hour and a half a day at the times that we need to sort of be able to do something else, at least they're learning something when they're doing that. So maybe there's a way to do that in Spanish too, because I know in the United States, Spanish DVDs are available.
Absolutely. And almost all cable providers anymore, I know that different satellite providers have a plethora of Spanish-speaking channels. So it's another thing to kind of uses practice. Try to turn off the subtitles and see if you can keep up with what's going on.
I think you probably can. Because I was interesting. I was watching my daughter yesterday and the past couple of days, 2 or 3, playing with kids that did not speak English. And I looked at it and I thought, isn't this amazing? They can communicate with each other. They're actually communicating. They're not exactly saying the same thing. But they are communicating. They're getting their point across. And it doesn't matter whether they're Italian, French, English, Muslim, Hebrew, Christian. It doesn't matter. Because at that point in time, there's such a sponge that they can do what we can't do as we get older because we've created certain barriers. The interesting thing, the other thing I think is some of the facts that are really facing us in our public elementary schools, there's only 15% teach a foreign language, which is a drop of 24% only a decade ago. God knows what it'll be another 10 years.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I mean, that's a huge drop when you think about it. And when you think about the amount of Spanish that is in New York, Miami, Los Angeles, San Diego, there's a lot of Spanish-speaking people from a lot of different parts of South America and Spain, and yet we have decided that we want to be less able to communicate with them. Now, wouldn't you think that later on creates a barrier between us?
Yeah, as if we need more.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah.
The thing is like in the United Kingdom, what's happening now, for instance, in the United Kingdom, is there's a very large, and in all of Europe, there's a very large influx of not right now, but over the past 20 years, there's been a very large influx of immigration, purely and simply because the population hasn't been able to keep up with the rate of growth. So they've imported a lot of people from Africa, South America, etc., etc. And what ends up happening there is they're not integrated into the society. They create their own groups and their own types of religion and their own types of language, etc., which then ostracizes them and the community that they live in instead of integrating themselves into the society. And I think that causes problems for us later on. It won't cause problems right away, but it'll cause problems in another 15, 20 years because you're going to have groups saying, no, I want to do this and I want to do that. And then you're going to have, opinions that differ and arguments and fights and, violence from that point. So
it would be nice if you could figure out a way to let it work both ways. In other words, yes, we want you here, but we also want you to keep your own traditions and customs. Teach us yours. We'll teach you yours, and maybe we can learn something from each other and tear down the walls that way. And it's sad that
right.
It's not the case. But if we could figure out a way to make that happen, I think we would all understand each other a lot better and get along a lot better, and it would just be a better world.
Something. As you know, I've worked in many countries. I've worked in Russia, in Lithuania, in Hungary, Romania, France, Spain, Italy. I've been to all of them, and it's interesting. What I watched was people that over the past 20 or 30 years or so, 20 years or so, I see that the old regime, especially when you're coming from the Iron Curtain, etc., a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries such as Romania and Hungary and Russia, etc., the people that are over 30, 40, 50 years old, they really don't care. They really speak one language. That's all they had, and that's all they needed to do. But now, a lot of students in Europe and in the East are speaking more than one language. In fact, 80% of students in Europe speak at least two languages. At least two languages. You can go to any table that you go to in France or Italy, and you'll hear more than one language being spoken, which means we can communicate with each other. And I think half of the world's problems is that we can't communicate with each other and understand what everybody else's opinion is. And it then becomes told by word of mouth, which, as we know, can change, and then those opinions change when we get, biases that happen, which I think is, unfortunate. I want to give you a couple of other facts. Only 10% of native-born Americans can speak a language other than English. Only 10%, according to an analysis of 2010 census figures. In Europe, 53% of students have maths as a second language, often English. And in the United States, the percentage is 18% of maths as a second language. So, here's another great, interesting thing about languages, about higher test scores. Research really shows that students who have studied a foreign language score on average 140 points higher on standardized tests when it comes to critical reading and writing. For math, students score an average of 150 points higher. Because, as I mentioned before, having that other language allows the left and right cortex of the brain to allow you to learn easier, which, as you see, the test scores show you about reading, writing, and math. So I think it's, the benefit is, as we talk about many times on this show, the domino effect.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, some cousins and I had this conversation once. We were talking about SAT scores, and I went to a smaller school. We didn't have Latin. They went to a larger school where they learned Latin. And because they had that foundation of Latin root words and things of that nature, they just thought the verbal side of the SAT was just an absolute breeze because they had that stronger foundation. So I think that's it's stuff. There's definitely, I think there's a lot to that. The more you understand about language, be it your own or another, the better able you are to learn it and use it.
Ethan, what about you? If you, as a parent, now you have a child that that has grown up, she's a little older, etc. Would you put her into trying to do that? If you now knew these facts of what it did, I'm just kind of curious. Would you change the way you looked at things, or would you still think that maybe it would be better to just stick to one thing and on what she knew?
No, I appreciate the diversity. In fact, I was just thinking when you were talking about how different countries run different broadcasts with different languages associated. I was wondering about what kind of language arts is actually available on at access points like YouTube. Like, is there beginning French, beginning Italian? I bet you there is, and that probably would be, so there'd probably be some good possibilities there. If your school or where you're at and you couldn't have access to a tutor, if your school didn't offer it, maybe you can just learn some of it online and start to broaden your mind that way.
I think the most amazing thing about the internet is that connection of being able to find things online that you never were able to find out 20 years ago. We have such the world at our fingertips, to our benefit and to our detriment as well, because it can be antisocial. But if you use it correctly, I think the internet has a great ability to teach us a lot of different things. And I think I agree with you. Picking up, being able to sort of see those things that we can learn and have the ability to do it. We don't need to sort of go to a library or anything else. We can find it online. We can find it on Netflix. We can find it online. We can find there are different things. There's what's that program that teaches Spanish and many other languages?
The Rosetta.
Rosetta. That's it.
Rosetta Stone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another one. I mean, there's so many different ways to do it. But again, you're not teaching your child just the ability to have another language. You're giving them the ability to broaden their mind to so many other things, like I just discussed, math, art, painting, physics, everything else, because their ability to learn is a lot easier.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, again, let's just talk about, the benefits of starting early. I mean, no one knows for sure, but if a child is taught a foreign language before 13, that child will speak the language as a native speaker without the accent that forms when older children are introduced to the language. Now, I speak Italian with a Florentine accent. If I'm here for a month, my English or Americanized English, whatever you want to call it, kind of disappears out of the accent. Initially, I still have it because they're like, oh, you're from somewhere. However, sometimes when I talk, people will say, oh, you've got a Florentine accent. How's that? And I said, well, probably because I learned it as a young kid. So you can actually allow young language learners to acquire a native-like fluency as easy as they learn to walk. Now, there's one country that really does that really well. That's the Swedish and the Norwegians. And I don't know if you've ever heard the Swedish talk English. Sometimes I think they're actually from England, and they, they obviously speak Swedish, and English is the second. It's taught in schools. It's actually in schools, and their ability to go absolutely anywhere is so open to them.
I think that's a good point. I've often heard. I think when you listen to someone who is speaking English and they learned it as their second language, often their grammar, pronunciation, everything, it's impeccable because they learned it the right way. It's amazing. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
The other thing is I was talking to a singer about a week or two ago at a dinner table in Budapest, and he said Hungarian, I'm trying to pick it up, and I said, well, personally, it's something that I've not really invested time in doing because I haven't spent the time I'd want. He said, well, actually, I think it's pretty easy because of the rhythm of the language. And I thought, I've never thought about that before. but looking at some of the facts and the linguistic benefits of teaching languages to young people, they actually, they study the right grammar and the practice. It's the drills they learn, but again, that's a rhythm. We talked a few weeks ago. We had a program where we talked about how music is important with communication. So sometimes, if you look at music or the rhythm of a language, if you hear the French, if you learn a rhythm of a French accent, an English-speaking French accent, there is a rhythm you have to hit to be able to do a proper French accent rather than the stereotypical one. Same thing with the Italians. The Italians have a rhythm to them, as do the French and the Germans, etc. There is a rhythm to it. And young learners really learn this naturally, and they absorb these sounds and the structures and the intonation patterns. And the rules of a second language intuitively become as easy as they do their mother tongue. So the brain, that young brain, is really inherently flexible, uniquely hardwired to acquire language naturally, whereas older learners really they lose that ability. We lose that ability to reproduce new sounds by the age of 8 to 12. And this is not just my saying; it's actually an expert opinion that have decided talked about this, which results in permanent foreign-sounding accents in the language. My dad was like that when he spoke Italian. It was very much with an English accent, because you can't hear the rhythm and the structure. So some of the benefits of speaking languages as a young kid. Any thoughts, Ethan?
As far as what?
Well, as far as I know you do a lot of musicians and that. Have you ever heard about this idea of like a rhythm of a language or rhythm in music that is? Because I always find it funny, when I hear English bands playing, right?
Yeah.
They don't sound English a lot of the time. They sound American. True. Why is that?
I don't. You know what? I was told actually by a British artist that it's because he grew up listening to American blues and tried to emulate it. And I don't know if that's the case or not. But it's funny. You'll hear a lot of American artists, and sometimes they sound British.
Yeah, I find that, and again, we're talking about the accent and the rhythm, etc. So I'm kind of interested in hearing somebody talk about it, because it's something that I think people don't really think of. You hear a song,
right?
I'm like, who is singing this? Oh, it's an English artist. Really? I didn't hear the English accent in there. It kind of becomes nullified when music is put to it, possibly because it has a rhythm to it. I don't know.
Huh.
It makes sense.
Well, I guess, yeah.
But I would love to know the science, the reasoning behind that.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm actually, when I decided to start teaching a language to my children, there was the parental thing in me thinking, well, can they actually start learning another language that will that interfere with then developing their English speaking skills? And in actual fact, I've found the opposite is totally true. Children can actually differentiate between two languages within the first 2 weeks of life. And I was told at one point by one of the physicians, etc., that it's also where you speak that language that a child can actually assimilate. In other words, let's say there are two parents. One parent speaks English and Farsi, and the other one speaks German and Italian. Well, the one that speaks English and Farsi would speak English indoors and Farsi outdoors, and the other one that spoke German and Italian would speak German indoors and Italian outdoors. And you think, oh, God, that's too confusing. There's 4 different languages. But what a child does is they assimilate the background and the location to how they should communicate with that adult. And, the interesting thing is watching my daughter now is saying she's in Italy. She's having to communicate in this world. She realized, I have to communicate like this to these people. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my point across. Now, yes, it may mean that child doesn't develop learning all four languages as fast as just learning one language. But, I think they will eventually learn all four languages like native speaking. And that's really impressive when you have a child that can speak even 2 or 3 languages, 4 languages. It's really impressive when you hear that. And the funny thing is, what I found is I've noticed with my daughter and my son, there's 2 things that happen. With my daughter, she's reticent to speak another language, possibly because the first year of her life I was away for a lot of the time. I didn't speak a lot to her sometimes. I don't know what it is. My son, or it might even be the child, because again, you have to look at who the child is. When you're dealing with children, you have to look at what their character is and how you get them to do the things you want them to do. My son is much more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but assertive and surely and he gets out there and has no fear about putting his nose into things, whereas my daughter's totally the opposite. And maybe that's why I think he picks up the Italian. I will say something to him in Italian, he'll repeat it word by word perfectly, and he's only 2.5, whereas she's 5, and she will struggle a little bit because she's not. In Italian, you say "si vergogna," which means I'm ashamed of actually speaking that language. I know French do that too. They're afraid of speaking English because they might want to sound like they're stupid because their language sounds horrible. And I think that's awful, because I think French speaking in English actually sounds very nice. So there goes my cognitive benefits, if you like, about a child's overall verbal development. I think it can be done, and I think parents shouldn't be afraid to try and do it because it has so many other benefits.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially too, there's a lot of research out there that shows that kids who are multilingual, they have better memory, better planning, they're better able to multitask. I mean, that's all. That's all just fascinating when you think of what the power of language and understanding it really has on the brain. It's incredible.
Well, you talk about that, John. I mean, the college entrance exam board basically say that they score higher on SATs. And children who learn foreign languages at a young age also exhibit better problem-solving skills, enhanced spatial relationships, and heightened creativity. So there are so many different things that it does at a young age, and yet, do you remember the times way back when you had immigrants coming into the United States and they're like, no, let's forget our old language and just speak English, which is great, but I think it's caused a bit of a problem because they want to be integrated into the new land, but they're ashamed of actually having their old language, and that possibly allowed less of an integration because of the knowledge these kids would be able to actually assimilate by actually speaking 2 languages themselves at a young age.
So, I would also like to quickly point out that right now one of our best listeners and retweeters, Tyson Sander, is putting some really cool stuff on his Twitter at REVT23. Some background about the rhythm of languages and information on languages. You should check out some of the cool things that he's tweeting along as we go through some of these facts and statistics.
Well, what are some of the points he's making?
Tyson's great. He does a lot of tweeting for us, and I think that's awesome. I want people to sort of pass the stuff on as well, because I think it's important. That's what our show is about. It's about getting information out to everybody about what our kids are doing, and how we should be getting our kids to be creative and allow them to give them the tools that allows them to get better in life and
exactly
and move forward in life. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when I was years ago, I thought to myself, "Oh God, I don't want to have a kid. I'm looking at the world; it looks like a disaster zone." I think it's even more of a disaster zone now than it was. But the kids are the only ones that are going to be able to do it. And if you give them the tools to do it, maybe they can actually help us change some of the issues that we have. I mean, look what happened in France this past week.
Right.
The 20 people that were killed, and how it's just. That to me is an ignorance. That to me is some people being narrow-minded and being taught only one thing and not allowing to be opened up to other possibilities, and that's what they know, and they've been taught that since a young age, and that's what they know, and it ends up being detrimental to not only themselves but to the rest of society. So, I think learning another language allows you to understand other people, to know what they are. Learn it. Don't stick your head in the sand. I think that's the worst thing you can ever do.
Well, I agree with that.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, learn something from somebody else. Just try and find out their point of view rather than sticking your own on them. I mean, because that's where half these issues are going now. These issues of hatred and single-mindedness this is about this is how they've been taught. People have been taught. There's images. I don't know about you guys, but there's certain times I always liken back to images that I see. And I always remember this one image. This probably goes back many years. I remember seeing a news broadcast about the Middle East, and I remember seeing this father. He probably had like a 4-year-old in his hands, and he stuck a Kalashnikov in the kid's hand and raised it in the air. And I'm like, wow, you're teaching a child to hate from that very young age. Right. You're keeping your narrow-minded points of view and not allowing your child to have his own. And that, to me, is a crime because, doing that type of thing all it does is it creates more division between us. So let's talk about, I've talked a lot about, this stuff. John, let's just get to the hero of the week, because I want you to get into that, because there's so much we could talk about this. I just want you to give us a few updates and bring us the new hero of the week, because I think, we did talk about music, we did talk about radio, and we've talked about subjects, and I think, a hero of the week will amplify that.
This hero of the week is...
If you pardon the pun.
Well, this hero of the week is, again, they're all incredible. This one made me smile. I was just smiling hugely as I read every bit about this incredible young man. This week's Peace Fund Radio Hero of the Week is a radio man in his own right. He's 18-year-old Kelvin Doe from Freetown in the Republic of Sierra Leone in West Africa. Kelvin grew up in a neighborhood that barely had any electricity. But one thing he did notice about all of his neighbors in his community is that just about everyone had a radio. Now, that inspired Kelvin's own fascination with electronics, but as the youngest of 5 kids, his family couldn't afford to buy him any electronic devices of his own. So when Kelvin was about 10 years old, he started picking through dump sites and garbage after school to collect pieces and parts of old electronic devices that other people had thrown away. And he did this because he knew in his heart that if everyone in his community had a radio, maybe he could create something that would unite his community and inspire them by making something that everyone could be a part of and everyone could enjoy. So after his siblings and his parents would go to sleep, Kelvin would sneak out of bed and he'd tinker with the scraps of metal and electronics that he had collected. He built his own mixer. He built his own receiver. He built his own amplifier. He built a microphone. How do you power it all? They can't afford batteries. He finds an old alkaline battery in the trash, where he found everything else, and he takes the alkaline battery apart. He learns what makes it work. And he learns, okay, I know what makes it work, so maybe I can make my own batteries. So he gets some soda, some acid, some metal, throws it all together, wraps it up with tape, and he makes his own battery. So by the time he's 13 years old, he's making generators and batteries for his neighbors, all of it out of garbage, all of it out of scraps. And then comes the moment of truth for young Kelvin. He's already built his mixer. He's already got his microphone. He builds a transmitter out of garbage. He finds an old voltage stabilizer that he turns into a generator. And once he gets all the other pieces in place, he climbs up on his rooftop with an antenna that he has also made out of garbage and starts broadcasting his own radio show of music and news that everybody in the neighborhood can pick up on their radio and listen to.
Brilliant.
And he gives himself the name, it's so awesome, he gives himself the name DJ Focus. And then when they ask him, why did you call yourself DJ Focus? Kelvin said that, I believe that if you focus, you can do an invention perfectly. He did this so perfectly, in fact, that he almost got himself shut down. This is so cool. Kelvin was funding his radio station by hiring other kids in the neighborhood to come in and be guest DJs. And the kids would go around and they would sell ads that would be played on the radio station. They would sell an ad for the equivalent of $1.25 US. Kelvin would let the kids who sold the ads keep 50 cents of that $1.25. And then he would invest the other 75 cents back into his radio station. So imagine that. Can you imagine a child for young inventors, through which he earns the opportunity to travel to the United States in 2012 for the World Maker Faire in New York City. At the time, he is featured on a YouTube video for a company called Radical Media that becomes this viral video that gets 4 million views. And as a result of this, he is invited to come to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at age 16, a boy from a dirt-poor neighborhood in Africa who made inventions and electronics out of garbage, to lecture college students who were older and more fortunate than he was. He did so well lecturing about his inventions at MIT that he was then invited to lecture to undergraduate engineering students at Harvard. 16 years old. Dirt poor neighborhood, built electronics out of garbage, and here he's teaching kids who are older than he is some of the basics of how these electronics work, teaching them to think outside of the box. It's amazing. And despite all of these successes that Kelvin had, he never forgot where he came from. He didn't forget the people back home in Sierra Leone. He didn't forget the challenges that so many people face in so many parts of the world. And so with his parents in attendance, he recently initiated a $100,000 solar power project in partnership with a Canadian Wi-Fi development company to help bring the internet and better education to rural areas that otherwise would never have had access to it. So 3 years ago, he builds and broadcasts a radio station out of garbage. So who's to say that in 3 years he doesn't solve the world's energy crisis with a paperclip and half of a DVD player? It's amazing what he has done with his ingenuity and his just absolute belief in himself to figure these things out. And that is why you, Kelvin Doe, a.k.a. DJ Focus, are our Peace Fund Radio Hero of the Week. And if you follow us on Twitter, at Peace Fund Radio, we're going to put up a link to a talk that Kelvin recently did last year in New York at the TEDx conference for young teen leaders. It's 12 minutes long. It's the best 12 minutes you'll spend today. You will just do nothing but smile to listen to this amazing young man tell his story about making electronics from trash and having these incredible successes that I believe will change the world. It's incredible.
Awesome.
Yeah. How old is he? How old is he right now?
He's 18 now, but he was 10 years old when he started making his little electronic devices, and he was 13 when he started broadcasting his own radio station, built entirely from components made of trash.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Incredible.
Amazing. I think, you see, this is really interesting because, again, we talked about earlier on, we talked about how communication is a key thing, and he found a way without anything. He didn't have to have a lot of money to learn how to communicate with other people, and which goes the same thing into putting the problem of languages to parents who can't afford to put their kids into private schools. They're three times as unlikely to offer foreign language students. Sorry, they're 3 times as likely to offer foreign language programs to elementary kids, according to a national survey. And private tutoring centres or weekend language schools are also thriving because of it. So I think you've got to really know that nationally, full or partially immersion programs, where all or many of the academic courses are taught in a foreign language, have grown since the 1970s. And it's unfortunate that we can't do that in our own schools.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, immersion programs are gaining popularity. I mean, foreign language immersion refers to a process of instruction in which students learn a second language, and such second language is used as a medium to teach the school's curriculum. In other words, your classroom instruction is done only through a second language being taught. That's how I actually want my daughter to go to school. And we've been talking about doing that. But unlike schools that offer separate foreign language classes or isolated lessons, immersion programs encourage true bilingualism, with students receiving regular instruction on a second language for a part of the day or specific days during the week. You don't have to have, go to a private school, or spend that type of money to give your kids the education that they really could really do with by allowing them to learn a second language.
Right.
And I mean, Kelvin's, he's 10 years old. He lives in Africa. How was he supposed to communicate with anybody in America? I bet he spoke English by the time he got there.
Oh, I'm sure he probably did. Yeah.
Right?
And his whole thing, his whole thing was communication. He wanted to bring his neighborhood together by making something that everybody could be a part of and everybody could enjoy. And he didn't have the tools that he needed to do that on his own, so he made them out of scraps and pieces of things that he found in the garbage.
Right. I want to actually give a shout out to a couple of organizations that actually do help this. One is the Center for Applied Linguistics, which is www.cal.org, as I've been told many times before. CAL's mission is basically to promote language learning and cultural understanding by serving as a trusted source of research, resources, and policy analysis. Through its work, CAL seeks solutions to issues involving language and culture as they relate to access and equity in education and society around the globe. So check them out at www.cal.org. There's also Global Language Program, which is www.globallanguageproject.org. They are an innovative educational movement who equip disadvantaged elementary public school students in New York City to compete in the globalized world and workforce. They provide a comprehensive language training program aimed at helping them achieve fluency in the language other than English. So check them out as well, because that's another place you can actually turn to. And check the internet out, because there will be other places as well that allow you to do that. You don't necessarily have to be spending thousands of dollars to get your kid the education that can actually help them in so many other areas of their life.
Agreed.
Right? I mean, I think, our kids these days need that. And as I said, the world is getting smaller. I'd love my kids to learn Chinese or Russian or something, where the East meets West in a sense, because, going back to your previous comment, John, which language should you choose? It'll come to you.
Exactly.
Do you know what? It'll come to you. You can't use that excuse. What language would your kid, stick a DVD on of Russian, stick a DVD on or a program in Spanish or something, to see if your kid pays attention. And maybe that's the one they want to learn. I'm always, when people ask me before what martial arts should I study, I always said, well, let's look at a few of them and see which one you kind of are attracted to, and you'll learn that one better. So, which one is it? I mean, that's for you to do a little bit of research on, but I think it's important. Anyway, we've got another 3 minutes. Again, we're out of the show, almost. So, John, do we have any other updates before we run this show down into the ground?
Well, I think I had mentioned briefly last week. I wanted to mention again that the Nickelodeon channel, nick.com/Halo, had their Halo Awards show recognizing young people who had done amazing things. 3 of the 5 young people they recognized were Peace Fund Radio Heroes of the Week. Nicholas Lowinger from Gotta Have Soul, SOLE Foundation, who gives shoes to homeless veterans and homeless children. Yash Gupta from Sight Learning, who distributes eyeglasses to children in third world countries who can't afford their own, and thus increasing their opportunities to learn. And Lulu Cerrone from LemonadeWarriors.com. And very soon they will be announcing the 3.dash.org Global Teen Leaders for 2015. And as we've noticed a trend, so many of the previous Global Teen Leaders have been kids who we have told you about first on Peace Fund Radio. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Ethan, I know that you might have an announcement as well to make. Can you, do you want to, I know you've got a few things to say, so go ahead.
Well, just real quick, I don't have anything too serious, but I will be making an appearance on support of the Make the World a Better Place Foundation, March 7th and 8th at Tulare Sci-Fi Con, which was a fantastic experience last year, and that's March 7th and 8th, and I will be there again to do a broadcast if anyone is interested. More on that later. I'll turn it over to you guys for the quote.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening, and we'll definitely be back next week. And John, thank you for joining us. We'll be talking soon. Ethan, I'll talk to you very shortly.
My honor as always.
Fabulous. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to Bev Shahara for bringing us all the quotes and statistics. A quote this week from it's from our hero of the week, Kelvin. If I'm asked to summarize the lessons of my life so far, there is one thing I will say. Creativity is universal and can be found in places where one does not expect to find it, and perseverance and passion are essential to nurturing that creative ability. This is Adrian Paul, Ethan Dettenmaier, and John Beerley, and we'll see you again.
You're listening to Peace Fund Radio with Ethan Dettenmaier and Adrian Paul, right here on LA Talk Radio.